All right. Well, hello everybody. This is Jon Croft, and this is Cultural Warfare with Jon Croft, and I am Jon Croft. And we have Rebecca here tonight. How are you doing, Rebecca?
Hi, I'm doing good. How are you
Ah,
doing?
doing good. Let me turn you up there a little bit. Okay. Yeah, so didn't your flowers just fell down right before the show, didn't it?
Yes, we were a little late. We had a flower mishap.
Flower emergency. That's funny.
A friend gave me some flowers, and I'm like, how can I get these into the shot? And then I just knocked them over.
That's great. Good intentions. But yeah, so it's been an interesting week. Have you had any actually, should I let you ask me that question?
Have you had any media experiences this week,
I have
Mr. John?
had some, but not that many. Um, and some of them I can't talk about, but like, um, not can't, but
You
I
won't
guess
you won't talk
I
about them.
won't. I won't do it. Uh, this is the Light Princess,
Ah,
and I've been reading it to our kids in the mornings.
yeah,
Not every morning, but isn't it great?
it's so good.
It's just great. I mean, we read The Princess and Curdie and the Princess and the Goblin before
Mhm.
this, and you can definitely tell the difference. It's a different kind of, I guess he's more concise in this. He's more like, I don't know the difference.
It's funnier.
This is funnier. Yes.
It's more lighthearted. It's more
Hmm.
playful. Which makes sense in light of the main character. It's
No
just
pun
very,
intended.
yeah, it's very charming. It's very
Yeah,
fun, cute, like super cute.
it
Um,
is. And the king and queen are charming and cute on the Light Princess. I guess the Princess and Curdie, I seemed like he did a lot more detailed descriptions. Some of them seemed unnecessary to me. Um, and I just prefer this one so much more. This is like it's cinematic as well. Like it's got
mhm.
great visuals. He even like paints a picture with the visuals, but
Yeah.
he's still concise with them too. He's
So,
concise with the interactions, he's concise with the imagery, he's concise with
yeah,
the plot. And it's just better written, I think.
yeah.
Um, so
So,
I can see someone like getting an introduction to George MacDonald by reading like Fantastes or especially The Princess and the Goblins or Prince and Curdie and being like, well, he's okay. You know what I mean? I can see them doing that and then not looking further into something like The Light Princess and not seeing his greater potential as a writer as a result. But we're
yeah,
going to talk more about this tonight too. So, uh,
yeah. Do you want to give a synopsis of it, or do you want to do that later?
I'll do that later.
Okay.
Uh, and there was also some music I was going to share, but it had half naked women in it. So, and I didn't realize that that was the case. I just thought he's a great musician and stuff. We can talk more about him later too. But yeah, so not a lot this week, but we can go into our main topic if you want, unless you have any additional comments.
Yeah, yeah. I wanted to share. Uh, so I've been So you recommended to me Jason Farley. He has a podcast called The Architecture of Reality,
Hmm.
which I really enjoyed. And
Yeah, I do too.
he records it like every day. But
Yeah.
as I was listening to it, I stumbled upon a poem that he wrote called As You Wish. And it's a Princess Bride inspired poem. And I just kept thinking about it after I read it. So I
Hmm.
was thinking about it all week. So this is truly my media experience.
Cool.
I'm going to read part of it, if that's all right.
Yeah, of course.
Um, have you seen it? One of your own poets has declared, life is pain, Highness. Anyone who tells you different is selling something. but he turned out to be her savior in disguise. Have you seen it? He suffered beyond the suffering of any man before or since, because he loved like he kissed, more passionately than anyone before or since. And though they always shriek louder when preparing to feed on human flesh, and though Buttercup could not fend off an ROUS or climb herself out of the lightning sand, the dread pirate farm boy has been developing an immunity to iocane powder. Also, he is not left-handed. Have you seen it? Buttercup cannot overpower the pig Humperdinck and his perfect ears. So Miracle Max and his wife, who is not even sure she wants to be that anymore, coats the resurrection in chocolate so that though it is inconceivable, it will go down easier. And that's just part of it. There's more, but
Lots of fun.
I was just like, wow.
Well, it's just such an instant reminder of what a classic that movie is. I mean, obviously he weaves these things together in a lyrical way as well, but just the fact that those things, each of those individual things are such joyful things in that movie.
Yeah.
It's just
And
packed with goodness.
And yes, he weaves the language of Christ, which you watch The Princess
Yeah.
Bride and you get this feeling like I feel like this is about Jesus. I don't quite know how to explain it.
Mm.
And he's got all these different contexts,
He's
woven in.
the seeming criminal who, oh,
Yeah.
we're not supposed to like,
Yeah, and it says
you know?
he loves more than anyone else. He
Mm.
suffered more than anyone else.
Yep.
And even just these little hints, like he's developing an immunity to iocane powder, he's not left-handed. Like all these little things are just like that is so that's it. That's what it was. When I was
Yep.
watching the movie and the resurrection coated with chocolate, that's just
Yeah.
so I just thought
Oh,
that was
fun.
awesome. So that was my media experience. Also, I discovered something called Hopecore.
Oh, I don't know this. Yeah, what is
Yeah.
this?
Yeah, so it's a musical style very similar to Dreamcore.
Oh,
Um, and there's a band called Flawed Mangoes, and you can listen to them on YouTube and probably all the other places too. And uh, and it's Hopecore. Yeah, it's just sort of dreamy, instrumental, light-hearted, upbeat. Maybe not upbeat. That's not exactly right, but it's hopeful. It's just hopeful
the
sounding music.
hopefulness has an upbeat vibe to it without it being actually upbeat.
It's definitely in that vein of vaporwave and not exactly
Mm.
vaporwave, but it's in that vein of, that dreamy sort of
Yeah,
blurry sounding music.
I love vaporwave. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
great stuff.
Um,
I do writing while play
yeah.
with vaporwave on in the background all the time.
Yes.
Yeah,
That's good stuff. So yeah, Dreamcore and Hopecore. It's a lot of fun. I'm just beginning to look into it.
I'll do that too. That might be a good thing to write too as well.
Yeah. Yeah, Flawed Mangoes is the name of the band.
Cool. Okay. Well, fun. Okay, well, we've got a really big topic tonight. One I just love with my whole heart because I'm an idea person. And you know this about me. I could talk new ideas every day. I could get a new idea for a film every day. And you know, but see, the romance for me is the initial stage of the idea, right? Once you start getting past to the doing it, now you're committed in the sense of, oh, this is going to mean real work. And this is why I like development too, because to me, the real work, it's not that I don't appreciate or like the responsibility of doing the real work. It's that to me, I realize the commitment involved with doing real work. And therefore, that's when I start narrowing down my ideas. Is this worth spending the next year or two on to make this into a film? We got past the idea, right? It's a nice idea, but does this idea have enough strength to it, to last? And so all these ideas get narrowed down. Um, like I do not add a ton of new film projects to my roster all the time, even though I have ideas all the time. And that's because they start going through this development process that I formed, and some of them stay with me based on all the various requirements, and some of them go, well, I'll put that on the back burner. I rarely completely abandon a project. But what I'll do is reintroduce it to myself again later in that enjoyable idea process, right? Where it's like feels new. And so I'll put it on the back burner. And then when I think of it again, it kind of feels new again. And that's kind of nice for me. But once again, often it won't meet that requirement. There's something about it. And that's why I put it back on the back burner. Something about it that's just not compelling enough. So I think it's really important for filmmakers and artists to kind of be really self-critical. And that is in a way that by the time your ideas are presented to others, you have put them through the paces enough in your head that you realize, no, there's something compelling about this idea that I know is good enough to withstand the onslaughts of my friends and family and coworkers, and withstand the onslaughts enough to where I actually don't mind criticism, right? Because I know that if I get criticism, I'm not just going to drop the idea and I'm not going to feel insecure about the idea, right? And so I won't feel offended if somebody kind of criticizes it cruelly, because it's kind of like, well, I know that other people don't see what I've seen. They haven't put it through the paces like I've done. And they're not getting the visuals. For example, if you're a cinematic person, if you're a filmmaker, you're getting visuals in your head quite often. Other people are not going to see those. They're not going to understand kind of the compelling nature of these ideas. I mean, The Shining, like that book was very different from the movie. Kubrick had to have these images in his head, and these images are very different than you could have gotten from just reading the book. So it's what you might call an execution dependent project. And some filmmakers are that way. They make execution dependent projects. That is, they can pitch you a project, but that doesn't mean you're going to see it. That doesn't mean you're going to understand it. It's what you might call not a high concept um, movie idea. So a high concept movie idea is almost the opposite of that. It's an idea that you can quickly and easily understand based on like it's a this movie meets a that movie, right? So somebody can give the pitch very easily, and you can clearly get what that movie's about, maybe even the feel of it, the characters, the plot, just through that simple it's a this meets a that kind of pitch, right? And but an execution dependent project I find interesting because it's got a lot more to it than just tropes. Because high concept ideas depend on tropes. If you don't have tropes in them, then people aren't going to get it. People aren't going to get that concept. So, but what I like, I mean, the movie Star Wars, for example, incredibly execution dependent, incredibly. Why is that? His production design was unique. Nobody had ever done his production design before. The sounds in the movie, so many things in the movie you could not pitch in a million years. There's no way you could pitch somebody that and they'd be like, oh, yeah, I can totally see Star Wars. They had never seen any of that. They had never heard the sound of a lightsaber. They had never heard the sound of one of those ships going by. These are unique things. And it's very execution dependent then when you are trying to make this kind of film. You have to understand the kind of film you're trying to make. And therefore, you understand the limitations of the person you're trying to pitch it to. They're not going to see it, they're not going to understand it. And that's got to be okay with you, right? That's got to be okay with you. So That means you don't abandon it just because people don't get it. And you have to be resistant to that when you're banding this project about. You have to understand that lots of people don't aren't in your head. They can't see the beauty of what you're seeing or the potential of it. Things like plot, obviously you can communicate plot, things like this. You can communicate characters quite often because you've seen that person, you know that person, you know who the Han Solo character is. He's like a trope, right? But that most of that movie is not tropish at all. And if it is, right, it's based on things that if George Lucas had talked about it too much, people would be like, this is really dumb. Because they're going to be like, this is Buck Rogers in the 70s. This probably isn't going to work. Sci-fi has been unsuccessful. Like so many reasons why this is not going to work. And so, but we have to remember how much of a success that movie was. And why is that? It was because of the execution. So George Lucas was just one of those people who has a strong inner vision. And that doesn't make him brilliant. I mean, I think he was, but there's people who are just blessed this way and they have their own strong vision of things. You know, they could even just be a CEO or something or be some kind of craftsman, but they have that strong imagery in their head, the strong vision of this concept. Um, but I bet you that many of those ideas got to come out in fleshing it out in development. And a lot of the reason for that is because so many of these ideas came from him, but they were also done through collaboration. So it's kind of like narrowing ideas down based on what others provide for you. So you give someone kind of a rough estimate or a rough vision of something. Somebody else goes and develops it, an artist goes and develops it, and then they bring it back to you and you say yes or no, closer or too far away, and which is kind of how Lucas directs things. Uh, give me more, give me less. And but that's not a bad thing to do in development, right? In development, you're kind of narrowing down your ideas to the best ideas. And this is something that a lot of people find difficulty with. They kind of come at things with like, no, my vision is perfect, and that's it. And so you have to kind of like understand that there's a place for flexibility and a place for to remain stable, right? And it's true that a lot of execution dependent directors are going to have things like that where they want to remain stable because people aren't seeing it and they're not getting it. So those kinds of artists tend to kind of hold on to these things and not let them go because frankly, this makes them special people. They have a special vision. Other people don't get it. And so they tend to kind of like dig in and hold on to them. And if they don't, then they lose the very thing that makes them special, right? And so an artist can't really do that. An artist has to hold on to the thing that makes them special. And so if someone had convinced George Lucas, no, these production design ideas are terrible, because maybe he shared his ideas too much, and then other people ripped them to shreds, and he was not secure enough in himself as an artist, well, he could just throw filmmaking away and decide not to do it because people are way too critical of his very original, very visionary ideas. And they're not seeing it. They're not seeing the whole picture. They're not seeing how this can play out on the big screen. So you kind of do have to know where to dig in and go, this isn't going to change. And then you have to know who to share that with because a lot of people are going to think you're being very unflexible in a rude way. And some people are going to think that kind of thing. And so those are the people you can't share your inflexibility with. You have to share the things, the other things, the things that you can be flexible on. And I find that things like, for example, like plot are generally things we should be flexible on because as soon as you get into the editing room, those things could change very quickly, and you see things then that you did not see before. And additionally, when you go into production and you shoot things, it's going to turn out differently than you imagined. So the end of a scene, the beginning of another scene, a performance, something is going to make that scene tone deaf differently than the way it was in your head. Or it's going to sing in a different way, right? Um, so, you have to be open to that, to changing plots in your movie. Um, Obviously, this can't change the substance of your story too much. You have to kind of hold on to the real substance of your story. And often this is really about characters more than it is about plot. Characters are things we hold very dear as not just as creators, but as viewers, right? Because you attach yourself to a character. And this is often what makes a film a good film. So, and series these days, especially series are very character driven. So you have to kind of like get a really good idea of who this character is. And then when you hire this actor, it it's true, you kind of become dependent on this actor because they can carry the vision of this character in a very important way, right? So they become very important to the creation of this story, you know, especially in the series. But with a film, um, again, character is still very important, and but it's true that there are ways you can mitigate that issue if it becomes an issue. You create an iconic character that speaks louder than the actor themselves. And there's various ways you can do that. But for example, superheroes do that very well, right? Because their character is not just about their performance, their character becomes about their qualities that are larger than life, their superpowers, their outfit, their origin story, a lot of those things. And the truth is, you can make many characters to be developed in a story or come about in a story, right? The way character arcs work, you're revealing the inner substance of this character, right? You can do that in a way that superheroes occur in films as well. So in doing this, you can make your character larger than life, larger than a single performance by an actor. But that's not easy to do. It depends on the whole construction of your story at that point to do that. But so as it comes to development, let's let's go to kind of the beginning of this because this is a really important concept. Um, Hollywood depends on these kinds of processes. And when Hollywood doesn't have these processes, Hollywood kind of loses its identity. It loses what it is. It loses it's what made Hollywood successful. And that is much more than just scripts and stories. That is kind of like legacy building kinds of processes. Much of that has to do with like marketing. But development is where the beginning potentials for a story kind of come out. And the beginning potentials for a story have to do with communicating the essence of that story to in a way that makes it endlessly compelling and interesting to the audience. And obviously, Hollywood does this not just to do it, but to make money. So that's why I said marketing is a big part of this process. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I think that's a good thing. It's kind of what made Hollywood so powerful and rich. So it's true that you don't have to get kind of terrible about it. You don't have to be as terrible as some producers have been about it. You can just be kind of smart about it, where you're not kind of betraying the essence of that story to make a buck. And I think because I think that's kind of like diminishing returns the more you do that. It's kind of the problem that Hollywood became eventually, which is this obsession with sequelitis and franchise-itis and these issues, right? The problem with those things isn't that they continue to monetize it. The problem with those things is that it cheapens the original story the more they do that. And so they have to prevent from doing that by continuing to show honor and respect to the original. And if they continue to do that and they can do that well, then they can continue to make bank, right? But if they continue to like it becomes like a disease. That's why I call it franchise-itis or sequelitis. It's like a disease, and that is that it's not about the original story anymore. It's about something else now. And that thing is like it's like a disease, like a parasite that takes over the thinking of the person, where they're no longer doing the original thing anymore. They're not no longer thinking about story anymore and quality of story and what they're there to do. They're thinking about the end result. They're thinking about the dollar bills, right? So that's like a serious problem in Hollywood. And so uh, I think if you just remain vigilant as a storyteller and understand that there's nothing wrong with making the money, but what there is something wrong with is betraying your original story. Like that's, so you can have both, but you can't do dispense with the first thing, right? As long as you continue respecting and honoring the original story, you're good. So if you go through a development process that's smart, that doesn't kind of betray itself and betray its own universe, that's consistent with its own universe, you can just do that forever. I mean, and there's nothing wrong with doing that. It's true that you can oversaturate a market. So I think what you have to do then is remember that a good schedule on how to continue to monetize and continue to remind and continue to involve your fans that this story is developing and continuing. If you do that in a balanced way, I think you're fine. But if you like for example, Marvel films, Star Wars, a lot of these big franchises, they oversaturate the market far too easily. And this just makes people exhausted of that presence. In fact, even the new kids on the block, the people that I often um praise, people like Angel Studios, are starting to oversaturate their own market in the theaters. And the evidence of it is that people there's been diminishing returns at the box office for their latest films. And I think that it's hard to have an event, right? Because to me, something like Sound of Freedom was an event, but it's hard to just keep having events every month. You have to kind of like let people breathe in between. And also you have to have a diversity of genres so that people can cleanse the palate, right, in between films. And I don't think Angel has established well enough that diversity yet. So people don't then identify their films with like, oh, here's a action movie, or here's a this, or here's a that, or here's this actor and star. I want to see them. They're just thinking, oh, it's another Angel film. And that's a problem because that becomes easy then for the audience to get exhausted of Angel films. Be like, oh, it's just another Angel film. And similarly with Marvel and Star Wars, right? Oh, it's just another Star Wars project, right? Instead, what they ought to do is clearly identify the differences between their projects. And so basically what I'm talking about is when you develop your franchise or what have you, you have to develop it in terms of multiple different experiences, a diversity of experiences, right? So I remember back in the 80s when these new ideas were coming about for merchandising and kids shows were happening just based upon a toy idea. And so then they would have a toy and they would literally create a whole series for kids based around this toy. It wasn't based around the story and all that stuff. And funny enough, they were very good at it, right? And they wouldn't put this shoddy story together. No, the story was actually good, even though they had to kind of invent it for this toy and, kind of cart before the horse. They still did a good job. You still wanted that toy. You still liked the story, and they did a good job with all the storytelling. Like, like the visuals, all that stuff was very good. The characters were good. I'm thinking of things like Transformers, right? But there was plenty of other ones. Um, and this is an example, right, of how when you develop a film or you develop something, you're thinking about the different experiences. Don't think about it in terms of merchandising. Don't think about it in terms of like, monetization potential. Think about it in terms of experience for your audience. What kind of experiences can your audience have with this story, with these characters? What kind of visuals? Like you're imagining a poster. Well, why is it this image on the poster? What makes this such a compelling image? It should stay with you. It should be kind of such sort of an iconic image, right? And so that's an experience. And it's different from the movie itself, right? And so in the movie, you have a variety of elements that make this story compelling. And so even in within a movie, you have a variety of experiences, right? So within that particular product, the movie itself, you have to provide a variety of kinds of experiences, right? And people often just do this naturally as a filmmaker, but they don't always put thought into it, right? So this is what development does. Development is about putting intentionality behind your creative process. So you have a creative process, you intentionally create iconic imagery for the poster, just in general first. Oh, now it goes on a poster. What about the kind of soundtrack? Like, why are we going with this style of music as opposed to something else? So, all of these things are experiences that you have to kind of be intentional about when you're putting together your project. And, like, don't let money be an issue when you're doing that. Just kind of play in that sandbox because, sure, you can't get the Rolling Stones on your film. Okay. So what do? You edit the film with a temp track and you put the Rolling Stones in your temp track, right? Go ahead, do it. And then when you're done editing it, you remove the temp track and you bring it to the closest kind of musician you can think of that could pull off a Rolling Stones sound, right? Ask them to put a song in there. You might even hint and say, I'm looking at something like this Rolling Stones track. Obviously, you're not the Rolling Stones. That's okay. You don't need to be the Rolling Stones. Just do something like that you think is compelling there. This can often work very well. And now you don't need the Rolling Stones, right? And you don't have to pay nearly as much money, right? Thank God, with a composer who's just looking for work and looking to cut their teeth on a project, right? And now they can get original work out there, not just some kind of cover song, right? Original work. I find original work is often more compelling than a cover song. Sure, people know the cover song, But original work kind of says something more, right? It's a new experience. A cover song is great on like a trailer, right? Because a trailer is a way for people to go, oh, I know that song. Oh, I've never seen this movie. Oh, that's an experience I can feel, and I'm comfortable with that feeling. This makes me interested in the movie almost instantly, right? If it's an enjoyable song that people know. And yeah, you might not be able to do that. I understand that. But you can see though that using different options like this can make it definitely more affordable for you, right? And the trailer and the marketing could be an afterthought that you go into after you maybe apply for finishing funds, right? And so there's a variety of ways you can do this in development. You plan it out in development, right? And so I just described the musical experience as this whole thing, right? So not even all these other experiences. So development, well, there are stories that are better suited for, let's say, a more expensive production that has great sets, has great production design. Like you know, if you've already made a few successful films, if you can find funding, reserve those stories for that moment. But if you're starting out, right, there's certain stories, projects that if you want to really do that story justice, you kind of are going to need a bigger budget. And so you have to be aware of that need before you can just go out there and pursue that project, because you're being realistic here. Like even very popular stories with a built-in audience could take 5 years to develop and shoot and make. That's a long time. You're committing a long time to get this story done. What I would do is do a story that is going to be cheaper to produce, but what it does have is your talent involved in there, clear to see, like you're putting it up on the screen so that this identifies your skill as a filmmaker. And then this opens the door, hopefully, for you later on to do a project that's going to cost more money. Like, let's say, for example, I was just talking about The Light Princess, right? The Light Princess. Let's say you want to make this into a feature film. This is a perfect feature film, by the way. But um, it's a fairy tale. It's even already got little storyboards. Why, look at that. You've already got storyboards drawn for certain scenes, right? And gee, I guess you don't have to hire a storyboard artist. Um, there's a really good one. Oh, this is the one where she kisses that guy accidentally and laughs. But the one I'm thinking of is when she's in the lake. It's just really charming. Oh, here it is. It's when she's floating in the lake. It's just a lot. And then there was another one of him, the prince tossing her up to her balcony. And I say tossing up because if you've never read The Light Princess, you don't know that she is not light as in bright. She is light as in without weight. So she floats about and she could float off into the heavens if not careful. They have to be very careful with her. She's a princess. She's very young and innocent, but she has no gravity to her. She has no severity in life. This is the moral of the story, is that a witch curses her to not take life seriously. And part of the curse is that it breaks her parents' hearts, which is true, it does, because how can they trust her to be uh any sort of queen over a kingdom if she takes nothing seriously? You have to take your rulership your duties seriously, right? Because this is a Christian story, right? This is a story by a Christian author from the 1800s. He understands the seriousness of doing your duty, right? And this is a theme today of doing your duty that people today do not understand. People today, they could care less, right, about doing your duty in society. But one great thing about princes and princesses and stories about them, right? And Disney subverts this whole idea, by the way. In fact, I think purposely, Disney purposely inverts the idea of what a princess is supposed to be, which is someone who puts her duty above her own um, joy, her duty to her society, her duty to her kingdom. She must, or he, if he's a prince, put their duty to that society, to that community, above their own enjoyment. And Disney does the inversion. It's always about the princess's desires above their duties, right? And so the Disney princess is a subversion of traditional values. So with traditional values, George MacDonald is teaching that the light princess must gain her severity, her seriousness about the kingdom and governing the kingdom. And in doing this, she cares for her subjects, right? And he ensures the future of her kingdom will survive. And so this story is about returning her to her seriousness, to her solemnity about the important things in life. And but in the story, there's signs that she might be healed, right? She finds a lake and she gains her gravity again in the lake, right? She can kind of float instead of floating away, right? And having no weight, she kind of normalizes in a way and rests and has peace in the lake. And this is when the prince meets her for the first time. He meets her in the lake. Luckily for him, but not so luckily in some ways because he pulls her out of the lake and she gets very mad at him and just like put me back in the lake.
Yeah,
And she calls,
she says, "How dare you
yes,
um, pull me down out of the water and throw me into the bottom of the air?"
the bottom of the air. Yes, and she calls him stupid and some stuff like that. But that's because she has no gravity, right? So, and she takes nothing seriously, and she's all kind of about herself and her own experiences and desires. And she calls her parents silly and things like this, silly papa. And oh, it's such a charming story. And the beauty of this, okay, let's think not just about her character now and about some of the themes here of duty, but let's think about the imagery here. The imagery here is some of the most sublime imagery of any story you've ever seen. A floating princess around a kingdom with a ribbon tied around her just to keep her from flying off. And, she's either floating about with this beautiful dress, right? Like someone who's on the International Space Station somewhere, but she's in a kingdom, right? It's so charming.
Yeah.
It's visually stunning, right? But you have to visualize it. And some of these pictures you can do that. But there should be more. There's just maybe 10 of them in here. But as a filmmaker, you can do that, right? You can start imagining what's she going to look like in that pathway, what's she going to look like outside, what's she going to look like with the light behind her streaming and she's floating in the air, in midair. And there's just so much you can do with that. It's just beautiful imagery. But you also have to realize now we're in development, right? This is development hell, guys. You have to realize, well, how are you going to achieve that? Right? How are you going to achieve that in reality with live actors? Sure, you could do it with animation, but wouldn't it be so much better with live action? So much, it'd be worth it to do the live action. Now, obviously today you've got wire work you can do, and wire work is probably the best way to do it. That in combination with some plates that you get from water from literally shooting up at her floating in water. Because what you do then with those plates is you superimpose her over whatever background, right? And so it looks like she's literally floating in the air, but she's actually floating in the water. Now you can do that, and that's very possible if you get your lighting right, right? Um, then you could do a lot with that. Uh, that's just such a great idea too, because the light will also create this kind of like aura around her and make her glow. And I think that's just even cooler. So that's the idea that I devised in my head to accomplish that, because it would allow her hair to just go out, and so many things you could do with that if you actually do capture her in a pool of water. That's very clear. So this is possible, but there's other limitations here. Now, the water tank, a lot of these things are going to be substantially costed, and the wire work, you're going to have to do wire work as well. That means cranes, that means safety checks, that means all of this stuff, right? And not just cranes for her, by the way, that's cranes for your camera as well. So you've got big lights, you've got two cranes, at least two cranes, and stuff like that. So this is already a little expensive. It's not as crazy as the Daily Wire stuff. Remember how we did a Daily Wire article on how they have these bull dancers? That's some cool stuff, man. They were
Yeah.
doing some cool stuff there. That's some expensive stuff, because that's you got to have these super skilled people. They got
Yeah.
some people from Spain and Italy who were just highly skilled. Um, but but we are talking about an expense here. And you know what the sad thing is you're also going to need the castle, because she interacts with the castle in a way that you're going to need a physical castle. And it's true that you might not need the entire castle, but you're going to have to build a set, is my view. An outdoor or an outdoor set, and that will allow you to see portions of the castle as though it were a full castle. See, just this particular scene itself, but also a lot of the interiors. The interiors can be doubled as the castle. They don't have to be the castle. A lot of people don't think of that when they don't do film work. They don't understand that interiors and exteriors are totally different. And you can sell an interior to a building which is not the same building that you sell as the establishing outdoor shot of a building. And so you're tricking people, making them think that you're shooting inside this building, but you're really not. You can save a lot of money that way shooting. But the problem with that too, though, is that because this is a castle, the studio interiors are going to also have to be a studio. You're not going to be able to shoot inside a real castle. Why? Because real castles are actually really strangely shaped. I don't know if you've ever been in a castle. They're often very small in places. And the problem with that is you can't get a camera and a crew in there well enough. So that presents an issue. You need a actual studio. And so you're going to have to build out interiors for the castle. And because you have these scenes of her floating about in the castle. And so there's a lot of limitations here with this story. It's a very charming story. It's incredibly cinematic, right? Here's the baby floating up on the top of one of their rooms. And castle
There's
in castle interiors are also very unique. They're not like just regular buildings. You need something that looks actually medieval. um, with these big windows and like the round arching tops to the windows and things like this. You need things that look like a castle, you know, how they always have the archways on top. These kinds of things are very important work to have. You could shoot inside churches. These are not always easy to get. You wish that they were. You could go to Europe and get some of them. It is possible, though, by shooting in Europe to use big churches to double as a castle. That is very possible. Um, but let me just say, I think it's probably a better deal to build out the studio and do all the interiors for like a week and a half and maybe 2 weeks, more realistic. Do all the interiors in a studio, 2 weeks, and then tear it all down and leave, and then do all the exteriors on this totally other separate location because you need the lake. That's the other thing. The lake, the castle prop in the background, and which by the way has to be life size. It cannot just be a background because she's interacting with it. And then you need all the wire work and all that stuff. And so there's a lot of demands here. And then you need the obviously the pool uh or the tank, right? And so that's safety issues as well. So there's a lot of expenses here. You're getting into the $50 million range, let me tell you. So you're getting into the 50 million, and that's a cheap price. That's not a US production. You're talking 150 for a US production. If you do this in internationally, you could do it for 50 million probably. So how do I know that? Because what you do is you study, because I do write for Media Moses and because I study the trades, right? And I study other kinds of films and the films, what you do is after you have enough experience studying that, you'll find out budgets and they publicize a lot of budgets. So you get to know movies that are like other movies you want to develop. And then you look how much they costed. And you get kind of a good idea about what this is probably going to cost. You see the differences between an American production and an international production by looking at their budgets, you know? So this you kind of have to reverse engineer that a little bit, but it's something you can do. Now compare that to this other story. This is Cottonmouth. It's Cottonmouth and the River. I have not read these other two yet. But this is really good. It's a dark, it's true, it's a dark. This is also a Christian story, but it's a little dark. This is about the fall of mankind, Adam and Eve in the garden, but it's done through this idea of a child who's been left alone, right? And he's trying to kind of find his way home. And he lives in this kind of like, I guess you could call a farmhouse in the middle of almost nowhere, in the middle of nature. And what does that say to you immediately? It's doable. How many of these have you seen? You see a lot of castles? No, you see a lot of these all across America. These are in the country. You can find an abandoned house and pay to shoot there. You could probably shoot there for a month if you wanted to, but you don't need to. Why? This story, you don't need a month to shoot here. And there's a river, and the house is a long ways from the river. Guess what? That makes it even easier. The river can be totally different location. These kinds of stories, I wonder if these stories are intentionally created this way. But the truth is this is just a very stark kind of foreboding character to the story, like isolation, playing with themes of isolation and loneliness. There's this like floating egg. The egg kind of represents sin that comes into humanity, right? And so the egg is something that um, been given instructions on to not eat. And then eventually he eats it after he's visited by a tempter, right? Like Satan. And because he wants his parents back, he eats the egg. And this plunges him into darkness. And so it's, in some ways it's like, is this really a kid's story? It's very serious, you know? It's got moments where you're like, oh, this is kind of really sad. This is really foreboding. But obviously, like the story of Adam and Eve, there's light at the end of the tunnel, right? There's like beautiful moments. There's kind of imagination, beautiful moments where he's got this friendship with this this kind of big monster. He's not really a monster. He's more like I guess he's kind of supposed to be like an Aslan character, right? Because you're supposed to kind of fear him, but you're also supposed to kind of like feel a closeness to him, and he represents God, right? And him and this guy are playing together. These are all small things, right? That a filmmaker can create fairly easily. They're iconic images as well. And here's the tempter. He's like a little rat. Um, and he's supposed to, then after this, get, access to his mom and dad, which doesn't happen. It's all a big lie. And oh, look at some trees. He goes through some trees. Beautiful imagery here. Um, Now I'm not gonna lie to you. I love George MacDonald and I love Light Princess more than this story. This is a great story. Um, Here's when he takes the egg and now he feels like he's almost gonna die. Um, he's on this rock, this big stone, and then says goodbye to his big friend who says he has to leave now. Um, but that's because he kind of takes the punishment for him, if in a way. Um, anyway, I haven't read the other two yet, and I really need to do that because it's really good. Cottonmouth and the Great Gift is the next one, and Cottonmouth and the End. And my guess is this could all be one story together. Each one is fairly short. But I was reading George MacDonald instead lately. So you can see my point. My point is that you have to think about all these elements and you have to think about, having some experience doing filmmaking, you see these things a little more clearly. But what you can see then is that location can be a very big factor. Location can be very difficult to shoot in sometimes, expensive to get access to, because you're imagining, well, where am I going to get this place from? Um, Getting a abandoned farmhouse is not going to be so hard, you know, but getting a castle that you have to interact with to sell the story, that's a different matter, right? Um, and even if you build a set, this can be just as difficult and expensive. Um, some filmmakers spend a year flying around the world trying to find the right location. Why? Because if they have to build a set, it's going to be so much more expensive. Like it's literally going to be even more expensive than all that research and um and renting the castle. So they would rather rent the castle if it's the right castle, right? But having seen those pictures there and having read the story a few times, it's probably actually going to be easier to build a set, multiple sets. So, like I said, it's in the area of 50 to 100 million, probably 150 for a American picture. Um, and so as you can see, challenges occur, right, when you are actually starting to do the numbers based on how you're imagining how to actually do these things and accomplish these things. Um, so other things like when you're talking action movies, you could be talking lots of other expenses. So genre specific work really can help you right off the bat to understand that you're talking a certain range of expense for your film, right? And depending on what genre you're at, there are people who just be like, no, I don't do that. I can't do that. And so you're going to have to get in with the right kind of people. Action movies, sci-fi, both can be very expensive. Fantasy can also be, period fantasy, sword and sandal can be very expensive. Why? Because of some of the things I just mentioned, right? You've got sets that you have to build with sci-fi and fantasy. You've got location issues, possibly. Costumes are less of an issue, except if you're dealing with a lot of them, this can become a real headache, right? Um, you're dealing with like a Jane Austen picture, right? You're talking about like 150 beautiful like gowns, and like just an enormous amount of, potentially costume work you're going to have to do. Um, some people love that stuff. That's great. Um, but you have to understand that these are the challenges forthcoming if you're going to produce one of these pictures. So you have to be ready for that. And some people just aren't ready for it. Um, and so development is very important because what it teaches you is to know your limitations and to work within your limitations, right? Not to get too precious with the story you're working on now. Be honest with yourself. And if you're not quite there yet, set the picture aside and do one of two things. Okay. Develop another story. Like I just mentioned, Cottonmouth. You can love Light Princess, but the truth is, you might need something like Cottonmouth instead, right? That's just an example. There's plenty of other, true, like good examples out there. So choose another story, right? It's similar genre, maybe similar kind of beautiful themes, but it's going to be a lot easier to shoot, right? So that's number one. Choose a different story and then work your way up to the Light Princess. Don't put it as like, don't say, oh, I'll never be able to do that, right? You do something a little easier, you'll work your way there. And number two, and this is a big one. A lot of people, I feel like they don't see this right away. They think, oh, I can't do it. I'm just gonna be sad and lonely and etc. No, don't do that. What you can do is make a short version of it. So, and then you do that using lots of tricks also in which you don't need the most expensive elements of that story. So you're not going to necessarily get um, the wire work, right? For this short movie. You're not going to necessarily get the big sets, right? For this movie. You're not going to always get her floating around as a result for this movie. But here's what you can do. You can do a lot of character work, establish characters really well. You can start showing the story of the Light Princess, which is essentially an interaction between four people: the king, the queen, the princess, and the evil princess, who is the witch. The good prince is kind of important, but he's in some ways an afterthought, right? He's important to the resolution of the story, but you're not going to get to the resolution of the story until you're actually telling the whole story, right? You don't need him if it's just a short. And if you do have him, it's just in the meeting of her and him, and he could be off screen. He could be like, huh? Like you just get an audio of a guy reacting to her doing what? Floating in midair for a moment. That's your money shot. That sells the whole picture. And you do that in the tank, and you do that in a swimming pool, right? All you need is this key shot. Normally you would get a tank, right? Well, that's because you're doing an enormous amount of shots in different situations, right? But if you're getting just one money shot that you need to sell this picture, because what you're doing is you're making a proof of concept. You're making a short movie that's kind of like a trailer in some ways. It's to sell the idea that you can shoot this feature film. And you've got the talent, you've got the vision, you've got this so many things worked out to tell this story really well. And so you start setting out to make the short. And by eliminating so many of these expenses you're seeing in the feature, right? Because you should do that work, right? You should do the work of coming up with how much this is all going to cost, creative ways of getting around things, while not losing the story and the essential elements of the story. And and so you take note of all that. And then you get the plan B, which is the cheaper version of that. And you also eliminate a lot of shots you really don't need if you're just making a short, right? So that's what you do. You make the short. And what does the short say? I'm raising funds to make the feature. That's what it says. And I can do this. But it also says something else. It says something to you and to your team that you can pull this off and you have what it takes. Because in many ways, you're proving it to yourself, right? You're proving to yourself that you have what it takes to make this feature by making the short. So don't get discouraged. Understand that these are big, daunting projects. And when you're just starting out, this kind of project is going to generally be out of your reach. But what you can do is something smaller, easier, or you can start with some other project, like I said. And that other project could also sell your ability to do the Light Princess. It could say, well, he's good with fantasy. He's good with iconic visuals. He's good with like floating things. I don't know. He has got vision, right, for these kinds of shots. And maybe it has to do with the characters, right? This kind of character development or these kinds of morality and values, themes that you want to embed in these stories. This could also say you could do the Light Princess. So understand what we're really trying to accomplish here. We're trying to accomplish a larger goal, which is a storytelling career, right? So development is part of also developing you as a good filmmaker. What are you really trying to accomplish? What is your ideal project? And sure, you could, like I know Jason Farley, we mentioned Jason Farley from Lore TV. He loves Dante's Inferno. He loves Paradiso. He loves these incredibly difficult. Those should be incredible. I mean, you're talking Light Princess, we're talking 10 times Light Princess here because these are serious sets too. Like they're going under the earth in like a hell-like environment. There's so many circles of hell. Um, and all these enormous amount of people and extras who are in these compromising, difficult, painful, torturous situations in hell. You have to kind of sell all that stuff, and and you can't lose the major themes in doing that. So you can't put too much. You have to put a lot of emphasis on these backdrops and makeup and all this stuff, but you also can't lose the foreground, which is that Dante is reacting to all these things properly. He has to react to them all very properly. So this is just very this is a very difficult project. But he loves that, right? And so do you think Jason he's going to immediately try to do Dante's Inferno? No. He's not going to do that. What he's going to do is he wrote a script, I believe, and he can correct me, about Dante's Inferno in like a high school or something. Like he told the same similar story. Obviously, it can't be the same story, but it's a similar story taking place in another location, right? So this is some of the creative stuff you can do when you've fallen in love with the story and you don't want to let it go, but you know you can't do it, right? Dante's Inferno is public domain work. He can take that work and adapt it into something else. Nobody's going to stop him from doing that. So now he can take something that's public domain, set it in a different location, right? With different character arcs and different all kinds, a lot of things can be very different. But because he's got probably the language, I haven't read his script, but he's probably got the language of Dante's Inferno, the major themes of Dante's Inferno, the torturous ideas of human, depravity and sin, and and the proper response that we should have to it, right? How we deal with this socially, mentally, psychically, spiritually. How do we deal with all that stuff? So you can have all of those themes in this new setting and location. So now, would I do that with Light Princess? Probably not. It's such a charming story. It's such a great capsule of that story. I don't think I could remove it from its location. And there's lots of stories where you just can't necessarily do that. But Dante's Inferno is such an otherworldly story. It's like this is other world, and so you can set that setting in various locations, really, and retain the themes of it. Um, and I just think I mentioned Cottonmouth because I think Cottonmouth is just it's like masterfully simplistic in many ways. It's just kind of masterfully simple. It's got these stark images in places, and I don't know. I just think there's some stories that don't have just a wealth of things in it, right? They have kind of, it's more like they rely on simple symbology, simple symbolic moments. And some of those stories get to know those kinds of stories as a beginning artist because those are things you can do something with, right? You can do something with that. So my hope is that we can have an influence and give a help to other filmmakers and artists who are starting out. As you know, we've had we've had Jason Farley on here before. We've also had another filmmaker by the name of Ryder the Omniscient on here, and there's other people as well who are fairly beginning filmmakers. And we've played. Did I mention this to you, honey, about playing with this idea to make another show, which I don't plan to be happening as often as this show, which is weekly. I plan it to be happening something like monthly. But essentially it's a film development show where we discuss how to develop your ideas well so that they are affordable, so they're practicable and possible, so that you're achieving the goals you really want to make, you really want to accomplish as a filmmaker, and so that you're willing to take criticism as well for your ideas. This is really important to be able to do as a filmmaker and artist. But you don't want to just take criticism from anybody. a lot of people don't know how films are made. And many of them are even kind of film adjacent, like they could be artists of some kind or work in media or something, or maybe they're a writer and they think they know how film is made, or they think it can't be that difficult or can't be that weird. It's often very weird, and very strange. So if you know how it works, these are the people you should take advice from on how to develop your picture. And so what we're hoping to do is um, do that show. Another thing I wanted to mention about why development is so important is because it's not just about like extracting, like monetizing your film, right? It's about exposing beautiful themes to the public. And if our stories haven't been well thought through, we don't know the potentiality for the moral of these stories to truly come out, the themes to be truly felt and seen from the public. And so an artist really needs to think about deeply the potentiality for their story to affect the public and in on what level, in what way. And so there has to be a lot of thought that goes into these stories so that when they're developed, these themes can come out and come out in the right way. Sometimes they need to be more subtle, sometimes less subtle, right? And so knowing yourself as an artist, knowing if you're a subtle artist, maybe you're not so subtle, um, there's nothing wrong with that. You just have to kind of know where your best strengths are as an artist. So what I really challenge people to do is focus on small projects at first. Even if you want to do a big project, that's fine. You should have larger goals, right? But focus on smaller projects first and then kind of try to develop those muscles required in order to do the bigger project, right? So that's going to be really important for filmmakers who need to develop. And I know that this is one of those subjects where I'm just like, I could talk about this probably for the next 2 hours. But we'll shut it down pretty soon. But did you have any thoughts? I know that you had a question before. Um,
When you were talking about the Light Princess, I thought I was just thinking about the script and the execution of the film. Like
yeah,
um there's so much that's explained in the story that you would be able to very simply explain in like a 10-second shot. Um, you wouldn't need a lot of time.
right.
Uh, all kinds of like hilarious little anecdotes of her floating out the
Yeah.
window and things like that. So in that sense, it could make the script, it could make it more of a short film, and then you'd have to add more to make it a fuller, longer story.
Yeah, sometimes you have to kind of have to pad out a story because
Yeah.
sometimes books take things at face value or they kind of imply things or in a way they're unnecessary to explain. When in a film, like for example, the passage of time,
Yeah.
when there's a passage of time, you have to kind of pad that out with some kind of like explanatory shot, some kind of transition where it reveals the passage of time. Um,
Yeah.
sure, some people like to play with this, and she comes, a character will come into the room and they're young, and then they'll come into a room later and they're bigger, and you're like, oh, you can pull that off with a lot of movies that are slick and modern, but with a movie that's about someone from the Middle Ages or something, that's going to be a little too slick. You need something more like classy. Um, and so you're going to have to kind of like pad many moments out with transitions from maybe one location to another or time changes. And there's other things too, where, for example, he explains things very efficiently, right? Like, for example, it has the two metaphysicians who try to explain what they should do to her and how they should torture her to find out
The wise
what's wrong
men.
with her. If she survives, we don't know. And it's kind of funny. And it's supposed to be funny, but then they just kind of very quickly explain right after that how she finds the water and learns to gain her gravity in the water. And that's
Yeah.
explained very quickly, but that can't be explained quickly in a film. No. So you're going to have to show so much of those events occurring, probably instead of it being a thought, right, or part of a narration, um, that this occurred to her. It's going to be more of like a played out scene because otherwise you're not going to, it's not going to feel lived out. It's not going to feel like she's experiencing it because that scene is all about her experience and all about how it affects her differently than her previous experiences. It's changed her. And so it's going to have to be lived out more. So there's a lot of padding there as well. And because those are really important scenes. And I think the prince also, it talks very briefly about where he comes from and all this stuff. But you're going to have to pad that out a little bit too, because you got to have to explain where he comes from and a little bit of who he is, right? So you might have to show, sure, it doesn't have to be like you don't have to show like build a whole nother set where he comes from and his castle and stuff. You don't have to show that, but you're going to have to show some silhouetted idea of him being in this other place and him maybe his relationships and background before he leaves to find a princess somewhere and go on an adventure. So that's more padding as well. So like the, a lot of these things will have to be filled in an adaptation. And knowing how to do that is like adaptations are unique things. Like you have to have a grasp of the cinematic language well enough to know, like, I can't shoot this the way it's written. I have to shoot this a little bit differently. And I just think that's charming. I think that's fun to do
Yeah.
that. And you know me, whenever we read these kinds of things, I'm always imagining how it could be made into a film. And so
Yeah.
I'm already like adapting it in my head,
Yep.
which I just think is fun. So, but yeah, I mean, it would still cost quite a bit and it would still be very possible to pad it out. But was that basically your
Yeah, that was it.
yeah, that's just fun to do.
Yeah.
Um, but like the Cottonmouth story, for example, it's told in a very kind of like concise, like this happens, then that happens, then that happens. And it's not, it's not like it doesn't get caught up in the charming narrations like George MacDonald,
Hmm.
where that requires a little more sleight of hand with adaptation. This one, it's just almost word for word. I mean, you're just like going from here to there
Yeah.
and having these experiences. So, like, these are going to be different kinds of adaptations. Some are going to
Yeah.
be easier than others, but you really just have to fall in love with these stories. And if you do, you'll find a way to
Yeah.
adapt them. Um, but like something like The Light Princess is such an important story right now because it deals with themes that we just don't know anything about today. It's much more medieval and about duty and community. And I love fairy tales in that way too. Often they deal with more traditional themes as well. And so that kind of story, like even though I just mentioned how it's going to be so hard to do the Light Princess, you fall in love with these stories and you just have to tell yourself, well, I just have to make it work somehow.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So because it's worth doing.
Yep.
But also George MacDonald has other stories that are not going to be as challenging as this to
Yeah.
produce. Although some of his stories are even more challenging, I have to be frank. Um, now You would think that the Princess and the Goblin, though, even though I had some complaints about that, that maybe I wouldn't do that one instead of the Light Princess. The truth is, the great thing about that story is a lot of it takes place under the ground in the earth, right? Mining is one of the themes, finding beautiful things in the earth. And then there's this country cottage, but it's a pretty big house, right? It's like a manor house almost. It's in the country and it's the king's like vacation house or something, closer to the mountains. And so you're going to have a beautiful house fairly close to the mountains where they do mining. But, and then the goblins are a difficulty. That might be a challenge. But frankly, you can have like a prosthetic type suit and pull off these goblins with a prosthetic type suit. And that could be a lot of fun to do. And then you've got Curdy and the princess and the probably the most expensive kind of thing. Of course, some of these things, the manor house, for example, could be difficult to find. But once you've got it, it's like you've got it.
Yeah.
And then the underground locations can be done with kind of rudimentary sets, which don't have to be that difficult to do. A lot of styrofoam, things like that, to look like rocks. But probably the most difficult and expensive part is the visual effects for the grandmother. And because there's so many cool visual effects that kind of like bring her to life and kind of reveal what a strange person she is. Um, that stuff is going to be really cool. But again, that's so much easier than the Light Princess already. So this is another just beautiful story. If you focus on the right elements, you can really do this story for 10 million. I mean, that's my guess. You did about If you had about 10 million, you could do The Princess and the Goblin. And that's got a sequel too, which is probably a little harder to do than the first. But that's how you want sequels to be anyway. So you want sequels to be more expensive and harder.
Yeah.
Um, just have more things in them, to excite the audience for a sequel. But and because they go to the castle after that, and they do go under the earth a lot though. So there is some good there. But the castle has a nice courtyard. There's also some difficult animals and creatures to deal with. Some of these creatures are very strange and unique. So you're taking the prosthetic thing to the next level with this one. So one of them's like a big scorpion, and another one's like this big headed hammerhead thing. It's just like such interesting ideas. It makes me actually think of what is that one with David Bowie? Remember
Oh,
that one?
Labyrinth.
Labyrinth. It made me think of Labyrinth a little bit.
Yeah.
This had such a charming story. Like
Mhm.
getting some kind of puppeteer to help with that would be just fascinating and
Yeah,
and fun.
it would.
Yeah, and but again, clearly this would be cheaper than like Princess and easier to pull off. So so yeah, that's got potential. Also, Day Boy Night Girl would be very possible. Um, and that's more of a situational romance. And so many of his stories are very possible. But you know, what you really need, you need a filmmaker with some vision, who's like who has goals, who really wants to do things, and then you find a way to do it. You just find a way to pull it off, and that's the charm and the fun of the whole thing. But you have to do that in development first. So these discussions have to take place first, where you're working together with someone. If you have a script, get an NDA, and share it with some experts or people privately. But the great thing about this show that we're working with Trithia Film, which is about development, is that we don't have to talk about copyrighted work and scripts and your actual personal ideas. What we can talk about instead is um, kind of theoretical ideas that have strong themes, and maybe you fall in love with certain characters and things like this, but they're not like plot driven elements. They're not things that would reveal spoilers to the audience and the listener on YouTube, right? They're not going to reveal spoilers to people. They're going to be more like what is good storytelling and how to pull it off. So it's a more broad question. And that way it also helps the viewer, if you're a filmmaker or you're an artist, it allows the viewer to then apply this broad kind of development theories and development ideas to your situation better. And so this is kind of an idea we have brewing with Trithia Film and with Ryder the Omniscient, and we're hoping to get some other filmmakers on board to kind of like start developing better faith-based film, better conservative film, but you have to talk about it, right? You have to talk about how you're going to make it better, how you're going to develop it and flesh it out, and the potential for these stories to grab the imagination of the audience. So that kind of marketing work later on comes, but it can't come unless you realize its potential. And like I said, you have these different experiences laid out very clearly, and you've fleshed and you know you're kind of fleshing them out better. Even if you just draw stick figures, draw visuals, try to get some visuals and storyboards of your stuff, because that's going to help you so much with creating these other experiences. And even if you can't get like I've spoken about the music, even if you can't get those kinds of musicians you love, get something like it, right? Use the original as a temp track, get something like it later, and you can still come out with very similar vibe as that. There's a lot of musicians out who are just looking for work and looking to help somebody. And so you can collab with them online, but look for stuff out there. Like look for people who you can contact, and you never know. You can get a lot done that way. But I think that's pretty much it for tonight. But like development hell does not have to be hell. It's only hell because you're dealing with people who are only putting money as their primary thing, right? And if this doesn't mean that how they feel that week, then they're gonna make it difficult for you or kick you out. And then you have to start from square one again, and that's not fun. So this doesn't have to be like that. So we're gonna call it development heaven, right? It's development heaven. It's a way to bring your dreams to life. And with God, all these things are possible. So if
Yeah.
you have the right attitude, right? If you have the right attitude, this can be development heaven for you. So what do you think?
I think, yeah. With
Yeah.
God, all
Okay,
things are possible.
good. And this can help so many people if we work together, because we want just people who watch to get ideas and to realize that it is possible for them to make this project happen. Um, so we just have to work together, you know?
We're better together.
That's right. All right, you guys. Well, development hell, maybe for some, but not for us. We've got other stuff brewing, and so we're going to be working together with Trithia Film to get this done, because as you know, Trithia is my company, my film company, and culture warfare and Trithia, A partnership made in heaven. All right, you guys. Well, thank you so much for listening. Where can people find you, Rebecca?
You can find me on Substack, Rebecca Croft, and on Facebook at Rebecca Loves Jesus, and YouTube, Rebecca Loves Jesus.
Yes, and I
Where
am
can
on
I find you?
mediamoses.com. You can find me also, of course, here on YouTube with Culture Warfare with Jon Croft. Um, and I'm on X at John Edward Croft. And oh, because of this project, right, you might be able to see me on Substack soon. I have trithiafilm.substack.com, and that's my film company on there. So, we're going to be doing more of that stuff too. So, love you guys and stand up for the culture. And we'll see you next week. Thanks, everybody.